Hello everyone, happy Epiphany. Today we talk a bit of theology for our series about the Jubilee and so the Roman Catholic tradition in pre- and post-Christian times. By now the most loyal Schwerpunkt followers will of course understand what I mean by this definition. I would like to discuss the active integration of divine plenitude and the symbol that the cross, together with the Fasces Lictorius, that it's actually a continuation of, and the same temple of Janus, deeply embody. We will talk the cross better later in another video, but it's important in these episodes to give sort of a metaphysical foundation to the premises to this specific doctrine, and of course its overall symbolism for the actualization of its symbol. I know that I'm getting lots of new subscribers that are probably completely unaware of whatever we treated on Schwerpunkt in terms of tradition, of history of religions, among my sort of degrees titles I have, even though not as a full degree, but it's a name, it's contained with a degree. Of course, history of Christianity, history of religions, and on Schwerpunkt over the years, together with, back in the name, mostly some doctoral didactic activities, I came much closer to history of religion because of my military historical studies that I cannot simply sum up, right? There is sort of initiation almost that you should go through, like especially in those videos about the Indo-European cycles, but also the ones, of course, ecclesiology. As you will understand today, everything is deeply intertwined. Doesn't make any sense to distinguish the two things, even though many people are completely habituated to reason in that way, and they're unaware of the overall meaning of that obviously always corresponds to a shortcoming, a sin, an error. Nevertheless, it should be relatively easy by checking out, especially my History of Religion playlist, to get the whole if you're interested. Routinely, I would say not much these videos, because these are sort of the more traditional based, they're really more appreciated in general. But, of course, the History of Religion videos at large, especially when we talk about medieval or ancient Christianity, for that matter, are less watched. And this is the direct consequence of the first mistake in general. And unfortunately, it's very difficult in a world like ours, like to make the average person understand, I would say, practically anything, but because that's the average state rate of humanity at this point, but specifically this kind of topics, right? Some people decide against themselves that they must not listen for whichever reason anything connected, especially to Christian religion. And again, it's their problem. It's actually also the problem of those who should make them understand, we should teach them, because it's always a collective saint that knows no excuses. I hardly know any Christian that actually knows what Catholic tradition is. So you understand that there is actually a very wide gap, to say the least, an abyss, rather, between our conventional usage of the term Catholic and its actual meaning, its actual traditional meaning. There are also, in fact, some theological issues that are, let's say, misunderstood by the accumulation of sort of erratic distancing from the originary meaning. They're not even fundamentally wrong, but they're taken just from a side of Christianity, some sort of meek way, which is also a great part of the reason why people sort of distance themselves from that over time, but just basically eliminating any gateway to sacredness at that point, the last ones existing, even in miserable terms, but still at this point. So the notion, for example, of man being a divine creation, or essentially a decay of God, the generation from the divine nature, from the heavenly world, that thus was diminished in the process. This obviously opens to a huge issue in our consideration of what properly God is, which is also, to some degree, definitionally, also from certain theological ground, in fact, unexplainable. But that's not really what tradition says, in fact. Incommensurable is one thing, right? Not being able to be known, right, is another thing within the same condition, which, however, opens more directly, like, to the direct connection with the divine, not the sort of hypostatic separation that is being given for granted, for example, in the Protestant world, and that also, like, conventionally in the so-called thing, the conventionally called Catholic one, having diminished over time, and also just the same Reformation being a consequence of that. But we're not going to discuss that. If anything, we will, especially as I will specifically expand into early modern history, also history of religion. In fact, we will see this much better in detail. So the same return to God is not intended as some sort of passive waiting. The same messianic logic does not belong to our sort of linear sense of time. I made a video about the meaning of space. We'll have to make a video about the meaning of time in tradition. Otherwise, you can't properly understand what for example, the coexistence of the value of the works and free will and predetermination actually mean, right? For example, the conventional position of Catholicism, Protestantism passes through these lines, that just the Catholics believe that, I don't know, there's just free will, but there is not like an immanent sort of at least pre-aware or pre-wanted, pre-willed, really, destiny of a sort, and the Protestant just thinking that everything is just predestined, you don't have basically any relevance, any agency, really, if not as an empty vessel of sort. In any case, this also destined, right, to return to God is not really to be given for granted in the Catholic tradition. I mean, we do, because we identify that divinity as the only one that cannot but win, right? But this is achieved in a providential way, which, if you study, for example, the Divine Comedy, you will learn has a lot to do with luck, the same second person of the Clausewitzian Trinity. The entire Roman religion, the Fortuna Caesaris, I made a video about this, was founded on this. So the sense is, of course, the struggle in the end time that men have to substantiate true God, right, in order to prevail over the forces of evil. And of course, in many ways, it's a metaphorical idea, but it's not less true. I mean, it's metaphorical in a metaphysical sense, and that is hyper real, right? And it's just our human earthly condition to be just a layered, degenerate reflection of the higher nature from which we are constantly and actively falling. We haven't been thrown there by anyone. We are the ones who perpetually keep sinking, actively sinking ourselves into our mortality. Now, in any case, God, of course, is the manifestation of the absolute unifying force. And so the ultimate goal to attain is the recurrence of this effort, of this struggle, the constant reawakening to the awareness of the sacred in the heart of man that has to clash against its dimming instead. There is also, for example, something that scares me to a degree, also in a metaphorical sense, is how contemporary conservative authors never refer, also like the big ones, never refer in all their alleged traditional recovery, that they understood extremely few of is the role of love, or at least, this is mostly embraced in that pietistic, sensualistic, emotionalistic sense of, God loves us, just positivity, and then from there you can simply derail into Mother Nature and all this Pelagian superstitions that have nothing to do with the imperial Roman Catholic tradition in its eternal meaning. In any case, you can deeply connect. That's why we talk about the cross in general in the background of this video. This deeply symbolized by the cross, not just because of Christ's passion, but because of the ultimate meaning of this cross as the full achievement of man. And the misunderstanding of the cross is just easy, right? For example, even if you have studied history of Christianity at university, the entire narrative that you've been fed with is secularistic and modernistic. The cross is just a symbol of the scum of the earth, because Christ was, in that sense, considered as a traitor, as a rebel, even as an usurper for which he was mocked. Being crucified was destined just to lesser people. And so there you have, for example, today's lesser people believing that it's just some sort of, why should we be attached to a symbol of inferiority or contempt or the lowest form? Well, if you actually knew anything about tradition, you would know that the cross is not that meaning. And actually, that, of course, there is a fully unified dimension in the Christian and pre-Christian Catholic tradition that, again, I'm not going to explain the obvious meaning of for those who do not have even the basic knowledge of understanding the etymology of the words that they use in their own language. We'll see better this also in the symbolism about the Fasces and the Temple of Janus. In any case, the cross embodies the active integration of divine completeness, a genuine radiance that signifies the upliftment and glorious expansion of mankind. For even there are just this obvious symbols, like what can a cross mean, really? Right? A lot of things, but it's somehow intuitive. That's also why it's a traditional symbol to begin with. Not everything comes from rationalism or empiricism or objectivism, right? Tradition transcends that, and the former are just the limits of our own mortal choice, right? And even intellectual limits that are not everything, however. And so this glorious expansion of mankind that asserts itself both on earth and in heaven, so in both natures, as we've seen in the video about the fundamental doctrine of the two natures. And of course, we know what's the point of the symbol, the heaven in Jerusalem, or the general meaning of the four cardinal points. It's, of course, the reflection of divine perfection on earth, right? That impression that the hyperreal has on the, say, real. The heavenly realm reflects dynamic perfection. This is not a immobile reality. Like even in the earthly dimension that is more materialized and sort of also further decaying, still everything is in theory, as a matter of fact. So these symbols are not just anecdotal or just wished for. If you look at the beautiful pictures that are used here, you can understand what I mean. Divine nature, of course, spans all aspects of existence through its infinite vertical levels and widespread horizontal reach, a veritable stairway to heaven that the cross deeply embodies. The foundation of the cross is naturally rooted in the earth, where it's fixed, while its pinnacle reaches into the sky, forming a vital axis crucial for navigating the intermediate stages that exemplify the journey of transfiguration, right? So from earthly human to holy man. The horizontal extending arms signify the comprehensive development of each stage within the fullness of achievement. The double-headed axe, the fasces, the Roman Indo-European double-headed axe, positioned among the 12 rods of the bundle sticks of the fasces, symbolize the empowering victory embodied by the cross. Right? Of course, the fasces has a sort of more constitutive meaning, how you can get there, like as a body, as a community body. The cross symbolizes the extension of such force. Right? We'll cover all this in due time, but just know that the Roman fasces lictorius is the same symbol of the cross, as it's the same symbol of Thor's hammer that is actually an axe. And so the Catholic meaning of the Indo-European, and just in fact universal by definition, tradition is just right there in the same symbol. Consequently, the first symbol is to be found in these other ancient traditions, and the second, as the Christian cross, in the new and in these various stages, right, in the gradual degeneration of mankind, but still reviving the same eternal symbol, with Rome symbolizing in herself the synthesis of these two historical directions, converging in the mystery of her concealed name, that, as you know, is unknown, at least to humans, not to men, in the invisible center of Janus bifrons. Again, we will get there. Don't be lost. Today we concentrate on the cross, but on its very premises. What I said about the Christian cross being the continuity of the Roman fasces is crucial here, because remember at the beginning we talk about this general ignorance and amazement at statements like these that are not merely random. Modernism, secularism makes us think that whatever a person is normal, which is of course the opposite of tradition. And so we have this very weird attitude whereby people are disturbed if they learn something new, so that preferring their own standard ignorance to actual meaning until, of course, they hopefully understand the latter. So that there is, remember, this is the entire point of the original so-called sin, that it is in its primal essence of error to actively, at least attempt, to separate and oppose these two symbols, the Roman fasces and the Christian cross, together with the respective traditions that is actually the same, just changed across the eras, that of course will fail to capture the entire significance and depth of Roman tradition, which is of course also loaded and rejected, just like by the devil, speaking of holy water, right? It's just this incapacity of understanding the metaphysical eternity and centrality of Rome in the entire history of mankind is the primary indicator of the cultural inferiority of a people, right? This is especially true today. I mean, this is the peak of it. I think it's always possible, like in the Phoenix, of course, Rome has always this centrality by definition. It's not anecdotal. It's real, and hyper real even more. So I believe that Rome will come back to the center of the world, also in a more earthly sense, in the reawakening of the sacred in the heart of man. which finds its unity in the elevation of cognitive love, right? Awakened by the dual power of the axe and realized through the universality of the cross, right? Love is the reflection of God's grace that is one true virtue by deeds. The value of works is real, and the entire ancient medieval tradition is replete with reference to this simple, absolute Catholic truth in both a physical and metaphysical sense. That is exactly this point of conjunction between the two natures, between heaven and earth. The winning hero manages to transfigure himself and transcend his mortality thanks to the grace that is bestowed upon him due to the glory earned on the battlefield. We've talked a lot about this. If you're not aware about this, just know that this is not a channel like the others. It has absolutely nothing to do with anything that has ever been uploaded on YouTube. I give you my word about it. And we will keep talking about this because this is just, it's not even the beginning. This is even a sort of pre-introduction of some sort to the topic. We will have really to talk a lot about the wall, right? So one might say that the axe, the Indo-European axe, the Fasces Lictorius, initiates the sacrificial process. Remember, you cannot really transcend without slaying yourself. Hence also Christ's crucifixion. But this is really the spoliopima. It's really the Son of God. It's the idea that in order to win divinity, you have to fall at the lowest. That's why Christ goes to hell, for example. That's why all the warriors have this initiatic rite, and in which they literally die in order to be reborn as the glorious winners, not just practicing a normal rite and saying, "Well, okay, I just had to die ritually." Like, no, it's an actual struggle, right? And all traditional communities worked exactly in the same way. While the cross brings it to fruition, the cross exemplifies this, the actual achievement, right? The blood, right? I made a video about the sacralization of the Merovingian monarchy that emphasizes how in this, Germanic societies of the migration era, in that case, especially in such a sacredly monarchic context that had literally taken out, beheaded all the other Frankish nobility, the emphasis for blood was overly necessary, right? It's a vivifying blood, right? Blood is truly life. Just like, again, the Roman emperor brings the spoliopima on the temple of Jupiter as an alter ego himself, and bringing the divinity back to God and being restored in this mutual recognition in that divine hour. And so this is big. It's just, of course, Romulus killing Remus, founding the same Rome, and eventually completely transcending human nature, deifying. This is the same concept. It's just the tree bearing its fruits, soaking its roots in fresh blood, this perpetual sacrifice, triumphing over death and glorifying the living God through the emergence of the new man, the integral man, the fully divine man. And this is, of course, a psychomachia going on continuously within the hero that has to truly sacrifice himself in that transcendence. There are so many beautiful passages. Think about, Krishna's encouragement of Arjuna. But the fundamental principle of the end of doubt, pure faith, right? The full confidence in taking this leap in the darkness is just but an illusion created by ourselves, and we have to eliminate. And of course, historically, both traditions can be traced in Rome and in her Indo-European background. But founding, we've seen what the traditional meaning of space is, right? There cannot be divine transfiguration without in fact, the same transfiguration of the material, the physical dimension as a whole, because there are always both sort of spiritual and material in one, right? There is no Cartesian separation between the two. It's the same fuses, all right? And this is important because also in the modern scientific talk, like physical has equated to sort of material, because of course, if what's beyond matter, like you can't measure in a laboratory just through matter, right? These are the heavy limits of our otherwise, of course, incredibly important, effective, and positive science, but it's mostly like our thought, right, that ruins it so deeply. In any case, both traditions, again, one of the Fasces Lictorius and one of the actual foundation of the Christian Church, can be traced in Rome, right? Peter and Paul are sacrificed, beheaded, crucified, and beheaded respectively in Rome. That dual aspect is incredibly important, right? Because it shows like always the two natures, like the spiritual and the temporal, and that's also an enormous part of Western civilization, for that matter, since then. And of course, the cosmic centrality of Rome as the only source of holy, right? There is no god whatsoever outside of Rome in any era, even before Rome existed, because Rome is that eternal, which assimilates both, say, the two, the pre-Christian and the Christian traditions into as if there were a difference with the broader one, into the boundless power of Rome's hidden and manifest essence, not by overlaying them, but by integrating and fulfilling them providentially. Where the second finds its roots in the first, and the first is embodied within the second. This is the pure meaning of the Holy Catholic Apostolic Roman Church, right? If you do not understand the deeper meaning, the Catholic continuation of the Indo-European double-headed war axe, right, and its sacrificial meaning, and the fact that the same Christian cross is contained in the first, you cannot go anywhere in your life. I mean, seriously, do what you want, but you'll never go anywhere to begin with. It's pure illusion. This is, by the way, all mirrored in the dual flight of the eagle, moving from east to west, renewing the miracle of illumination. That's Christ, intended properly as the Lord, as God, eternally rising as the King of the living, as all in the pre-Christian conception of sacred royalty. And also, as we've seen recently, reviving in the same way the sacred flame of Vesta, with the sheer force of the same eagle's wings. Right? And we will talk more about sacred fire, how it works in tradition, and of course the sacrificial meaning of that, but also its deep connection with the eagle, also with the phoenix that perpetually regenerates. Right? God's birth, the eagle, fixing straight the absolute in the eyes. Vesta being the same fire, being the same symbol of the sun, eternally rising, never disappearing. That's also what we celebrate in this period of the year. Thus, the cohesive traditional unity is achieved, represented by Rome's hidden name that signifies this eternal generation. Right? It's not even a regeneration, it's continuous generation. It's a sacred spring. For from death arises life constantly. Even in our perpetual degeneration, life is still present. An existence that transcends death. A life that lives through every generation and is capable of creating infinite order. For not talking about love and the same power that was attributed by in the Indo-European tradition. From such a small seed, the entire universe can be encompassed. In this sense, transitioning from one traditional essence to another through the singular axis upheld by primordial tradition, which Romanitas champions and uplifts through the ages. Those who interpret events solely from a historical point of view, or even if you want in the aforementioned rational or empirical sense, in dividing rather than uniting, viewing these events superficially and missing the deeper significance veiled within divine life, misconstrue ancient and new traditions as reflections of two disparate worlds or religions. That's why in school you've been told that literally there were something like the polytheistic pagans that would have also allegedly been the good guys, whereas, polytheism and paganism in pre-Christian tradition, in the Catholic tradition of the Indo-Europeans, were considered the lesser races' beliefs. So the fractal world of the pagus, of the villagers, of the Pelasgians, of the subjective, of the fourth estate, of the communists, if you want, of the feminists, and polytheism, a conception that really never even existed at the time. That is to say, every god was actually just an emanation, just like every individual, if you know what the entire deal of this is, from the same divine one. This is not to do with, this is Neoplatonism. This existed all before. We know it too well, right? The same goes for this intrinsic opposition, like the entire criticism to Christianity, mostly to Catholicism, to the church. These are all things that were essentially fabricated in a post-traditional Protestant world. Basically denies the values of work, so it's over, right? If you wonder why also, these are the countries from which today, atheism sprang, or the entire race was sabotaged and everything falls apart, just know that, yes, one thing is, of course, breaking free from a hierarchy that had been gradually failing in its mission would confer prosperity, power, for the still traditional value that was contained in that. But at that point, you have no moral break whatsoever. So just an individualistic endeavor. And that's where all the puritanic hypocrisy about this, obsession, for example, for material wealth as opposed to actual divine power, that is basically something you would just passively receive as some sort, or accidentally get by predestination. And I don't know if you ever read, Zwingli, Calvin. They literally say that humanity is dirt, it's worthless, it's nothing. At that point, you can also I don't know why they didn't commit mass suicide at that point. But, unfortunately, where the war has degenerated into from a moral point of view. But again, we live in this myth of, again, everything sprang from the Renaissance, the Enlightenment. Those were exactly the moments of the complete rejection of tradition and the spiritual collapse of mankind. Right? So this is not to deny civilization. I believe that we still manifest tradition in everything we do. Modernity does not exist. Right? This is the myth. Everything that works today, and it works also pretty damn well, is still within, of course, the wake of tradition. In fact, I think we live in pretty interesting times anyway, because they continuously reaffirm the generation of life and power. The point is that this also manifests because we're such a big system that it's somehow easy to unlock some levels of power. The problem is that this is substance without form, without adequate hierarchy, discipline. And so everything becomes ever more dangerous, ever more out of control. And yeah, things do go on, but we're also destroying a lot of life, as a matter of fact, in the process. And power. and divine grace. And I will not digress now on other things. I will leave for other videos, but just remember, basically, if you want the actual explanation of what's going on, conservatives are just expressing themselves in what Marxists dictated them to do by denying what the Marxists said. And just know that what Marxists actually did was to flip idealism, that in great part was founded on tradition. And so what you have to do is not rejecting what Marxists say, is realizing what Marxists say in a flipped way you can use against them, right? I don't know, speech is violence. Everything is violence in tradition. Yes, and it's good. It's a positive thing. You should be using that because we thrive into that power that we manage to build up through that continuous sacrifice in active power. You should be scared of power, especially if you're a Marxist, because you're always, of course, a communist, a Pelagian, a fortestator, so the lesser people of the world, and you have a very specific role. That's why I personally am not bothered much by the left. I'm bothered by the absence of a right, which is a very different thing, right? And essentially, basically all conservatives today are fortestator lesser people. I mean, they're leftists, right? They're national socialists. That's basically what they are, buying completely anti-traditional beliefs. And we know that from quite a while, just from a couple of hundred of years, any trace of any significant capacity to reactivate tradition was rejected. And that's what you learned in school. That's what your parents told you. That's what the entire system enforced on you. Because you're too weak to even have a conscience on your own. So again, it's always only your fault. And that's where the actual guilt stems from. It's not some sort of weird, as, again, like proper even National Socialists say, it's just the Judeo-Christian thing that wants to blame you for everything. Like, well, because do you think that you're a normal person? I mean, just the fact that you're a human being, according to you, is something positive? Aren't you ashamed by yourself just by the fact that you exist in the way you do? I think we should have a very interesting talk about this. Because if you have never heard of this concept, it means that you do not know anything about traditional power. Zero, right? And no wonder you do not have the palest idea of what Catholic means. It's your problem, right? If you reject Romanity, if you reject the metaphysical meaning of history, it's all on you. On your ignorance, or your under-education, or your physical shortcomings, on your stupidity, on your ugliness, frankly, because that's where it gets down to. The genes get rotten along the way. And whose fault is that? Somebody else's? Welcome to the fourth estate, paranoid, populistic superstition, right? Just be happy in hell, given that you're already there. Remember that everything you learned, everything you think you know, is actually you being trained like a dog to bark every time you see a symbol of tradition. And so you will believe this nonsense that Rome hosts as a vessel containing incompatible elements that remain unresolved. And that, it's so incoherent. I don't understand that. You said, well, you don't. You don't understand that. It's your problem. It's not the problem of tradition. Tradition exists regardless of you. You can also not exist. Tradition doesn't give a blip about that, right? Especially, at least, if you are completely zero on this. And the intent, of course, is to overwhelm any other power just by transfiguring the world, right? And that is God's task true, the new Apollo. Now, the dichotomous perspective we just illustrated, people feel puzzled by, represents a significant misunderstanding that inaccurately reflects the essence, character, and objective of the two traditions, treating them as separate from the unifying axis, the concealed name of Rome again, which is the source of their being, development, and capacity for realization. If you exist, it's exclusively because of Rome. I don't know how to break it down to you. So it is. The authentic Roman essence lies in the eternity of both traditions. revealing the first through the second, the genuine profound dynamic and effective unity of Janus, the fasces, the cross, can be understood in the integration of the living God through these successive symbols of marble, bronze, and fire constitutes the ultimate framework of the new man, the integral man. So, it's important to highlight that the universality of Rome is also illustrated by the stone emblem of Janus, extending to the wooden symbol through which the fulfillment of divine completeness is achieved solely within mankind, allowing man to reclaim his identity as Son of God, right? And this through the eternal sacrifice of fire and blood, right? The same wood that fuels Vesta's fire is the one of Christ's cross. He redeems and rescues himself through the unity of existence, overcoming his fall by triumphing over the transient with the eternal, and the divine over the human. Remember that men and humans are two completely different things. And always remember, of course, that human means dirty. In Latin, the term humanity means dirtiness, the dirt, the actual humus. I just said it. Consequently, this redemptive unity is actualized from stone to humanity. This is also important. Think about Mithras' transfiguration. He was originally a literal stone, becomes God himself. So the most lifeless matter, right, apparently that still always in tradition holds life, and even more so humans does, is at the bottom of this hierarchy that must and can always be transcended. That's also why the symbolism of the stone in the Mitraic tradition as well. And so this speaks of the conversion of the appearances into the essence of life. Remember, because it's again a layered loss of divine. It still projects the latter into these various levels, right? The essence of life itself must be fully reattained, and it has to pass through these layers themselves that are always, in a way, a reflection of God. So nothing is devoid of hope. There's no determinism or materialism that holds at any scientific or philosophical level. And this, of course, simplifies the creative diversity into the singularity of the word. Remember that there is nothing, not just nobody is equal to another, but especially there's something incredibly wrong about, first of all, the fact that there are multiple things and not just one. And secondly, that there is difference. I mean, the difference can be, in a blipped up way, your own way. Like you're incarnated because of your own spiritual value, and so the way you are is your own path to divinity, by a degree. But this has nothing to do with you being absolutely irrelevant, as you're being told since you're a kid. Like we told kids ever since, I don't know which generations it started, with us at the latest. I remember that in school, everybody's equal. Everybody, it's fine, at least we didn't go so far, but today the sense is whoever you are, you're fine with the way you are. You're important, you're relevant, of course you aren't, and it should be self-explanatory, not just in front of God, but also many other things, also in the earthly dimension. And you're not given even a reason for which you should improve yourself, right? And the fact that there are differences, of course, can be cooperatively congruent, right? The corporatistic ideal is the one of fact creating this united community body that can transcend. This is also the same principle of the church and beyond the sacred, the Holy Communion. That's what it's all about, because the Holy Ghost should be collectively received, and this common value should in fact, homogenize the superiority of the individual, this part of the group, just like in the sacred brotherhoods of warriors back in, it was the same identical point. The entire empire is founded on that concept. But today we are paranoid, even our authorities. So you can imagine, what kind of connection can there be with the sacred. But the very fact that there is a difference highlights that, first of all, a person is automatically better or worse than another, and secondly, that there is a problem to fix. It's not normal to be different. Diversity entails a problem, a very deep problem, an error, a mistake. There aren't two different truths for two different people. The truth is only one. So if you're different, you're automatically either better or worse than whatever you're compared to. In any case, you're incomplete, and so worse compared to the one, to God. Right? So the entire point, you can see also in scholastics, regardless of the criticism to the rationalization, the secularization surrounds aspects of that, highlights how silence is to triumph over forms and rhythms, while cosmic forces dissolve into primordial unity. Form, for example, is so important, just as rhythm, but in the one, they are null by definition. So there are patterns to that substance has to mold in the shape of, but at the end of the day, it gets subsumed into primordial unity and perfection. That in its assertion simultaneously negates itself within the absoluteness of the ineffable. The cross symbolizes the convergence of Janus bifrons, representing the entirety of paths and experiences. That's why all roads lead to Rome, by the way. This is the ultimate meaning. Right? Everything converges into divine unity, into the sacred of the sacred, the holy city of Rome, as well as the duality of the axe, encapsulated by the 12 rods of the Fasces, radiating the everlasting essence of Vesta's fire that signifies the timelessness of traditional wisdom. The stronger you are, the more you have to regenerate yourself. So the same wood of the Fasces is perpetually burned into new generation. This serves as a complete symbolic and actual demonstration of the metaphysical truth, asserting that the world becomes only one when the one encompasses the world amidst the actual ambiguity of apparent original determination. For example, the keys of Janus reveal the mystery of a vital realization that occurs at the human level, involving a dual motion that converges towards the center from both the apex and the base of the cross. If you're misaligned, you cannot achieve that, right? And we are constantly misaligned on the base of this axis. This process encapsulates both a descent from the divine to the human, but also an ascent from the human back to the divine, pursuing the total expansion of existence expressed through the arms of the cross. This concept manifests also in the way pre-Christian belief that God incarnates as a man so that man may ultimately become divine. In this definitive integration, the sole reality is God, for nothing exists outside of him, right? And reflect on these epiphanies, in fact, throughout all mythology. Why do you think that, Zeus incarnates? Right? There are different reasons, like whichever they are, they all get down to the boundlessness of divine power and what you can attain through that, and the necessity for which this incarnation occurs in the foundational ground of mythology that is not, again, separated from the earthly foundations as well. Therefore, the first tradition, the Roman one, in particular because of the fulfillment of the Indo-European Evangelium in Augustan times, prepares for the second, that in fact occurs in the same era. Similar to how the cosmic realm prepares for the Hyperuranian, the visible for the invisible, and the symbol for the reality that it represents. This implies that true liberation, by the way, can only be achieved by those who, in ignorance of their freedom, remain ensnared. Right? Thus, this freedom must be claimed by overcoming the slavery that conceals it. In other words, this liberation is functional only to the lower nature, meaning that everything is functional to the eternity of God in heaven. And so this process is exclusively designed for those like us that are entrapped by their own limits, right? And it's a specific dynamic. This is what entire earthly awareness of God consists in, right? The limit, the only apparent possibility to gap it because of the fundamental errors that we continuously incur in. Think about this in the current intellectual landscape. Embedded with the concealed essence of Rome lies the key to such liberating force. We can argue that the Roman Empire was all about this, manumission. And that's how it extended. That's how redemption was offered to those who would follow the heavenly leaders, right, to conquer the entire world through their own perpetual sacrifice, through their own perpetual service in the legions. They're rising up to the full Romanity, which must effectively rest upon the cosmic likeness intrinsic to the substratum of, in fact, of human nature, and reconcile, in fact, the latter paradox within the singular divine reality. That's what Rome achieved, made a city of what before was the world, as Rutilius Namatianus famously wrote. And again, the point here is this has nothing to do with a sort of emptyingly homogenizing force. This is the foundation, even when the substance runs out of the form through which any other life can grow and be funneled towards divinity. This foundation is also why Rome is initially square, representing the 4 letters of her name, aligned with the 4 cardinal directions demonstrated by her essential symbol. Right, so this represents, together with the fasces that you can, of course, connect with the 12, with the zodiac signs, the 12 months, the completeness of the year, and here we find the seasons, the most fundamental cardinal points, the equinoxes and the solstices. The total expansion of mankind really corresponds to the fullness of God. And this is true in Rome and from Rome. Right? This metaphysical root was impressed. It's the same reason why we talk in the Middle Ages of a Holy Roman Empire. Why this was not cancelled, like at some point, even in the Germans in the later Middle Ages, where universalism was gradually decaying because of the generation of mankind. They didn't say like, oh, this is not Holy Roman Empire anymore. This is at best like the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, along this pattern. But the metaphysical Romanity of the empire, and in fact there couldn't be anything else beyond that, also in the Germanic rulers, was fully understood and adopted by them. We know it too well with Charlemagne, with Otto the Great, with Frederick Barbarossa, with Frederick II. We will talk about the Ghibelline tradition more to understand why that was the case and why Romanity was unescapably so central. I mean, if you even even from a strictly historical point of view, even if you cross out the metaphysical notion, it's sort of self-evident why Rome couldn't but be the capital of the Holy Roman Empire that should have ruled from Rome and all around the reunified universe, right? There are incredibly practically obvious reasons, but these are even more about this founded in the metaphysical awareness of the Augustan accomplishment. Thus, the manly and cosmic foundation aligns with the divine culmination in the ascent of this hierarchy of power, but also a doctrinal, cognitive one, projecting upward in all directions towards the singular point that embodies and transcends. A singular point that is infinite. This is also a very beautiful mathematical principle, right? Infinite is a singular point, but it's also the denial of a point in its width. True elevation, this is also the meaning of, if you read the Gospels, it's obvious, like it can only occur from this, of course, manly cosmic base from which the liberating journey emerges, that is always dual in meaning, right? If you really are into biblical exegesis, you do know that the ultimate gospel, meaning lays in the obviously let's say, directly prescriptive meaning of Christ's teaching, right? Some are more straightforward because they have to help settle that earthly dimension, but in the ultimate sort of behavioral sense, there is always, first of all, a double thread, which is the earthly corresponding to, of course, to the doctrine of the two natures, but in this sense, showing like that the way of man is different from the one of God. So, what is literalistically and shallowly, of course, understood as, Christ said this, and pertaining that even just like translations can capture, even without any sort of knowledge of Greek, of Latin, etc., simply a banally deterministic prescription. This is true also for the Mosaic law, is of course the first indicator that you do not know anything about religion in general, not just about Christianity or veterotestamentary tradition, whatever. It's that there is always this dual equation that captures both planes. One is from the man's point of view, and the other is, of course, from the divine. Naturally, this is all the more relevant as we, in our condition, can just reason from the first, but the point of junction and the vectorial direction is there. One cannot reach God except through man. God is fulfilled only in himself, hence the Son of Man, and hence the absolute virile dimension of imperial Catholic power, which is also, again, a very notorious thing in the European tradition. In fact, in the very foundation, the most absolutely intimate essence of Roman moral superiority, where the apparent limitation of man reveals the true limitless essence of God. There couldn't be in any other function. It's a very different one. Right? This embodies the essence of the ineffable in tradition. Again, we will see all this in more practical terms from the scriptures, from mythology. Again, there is plenty of this in the entire Catholic tradition before or after Christ. The two, in fact, watersheds, let's call them this way, rather than traditions, because otherwise I would contradict myself. There aren't two traditions. It's always the same tradition, right? It can change write, it can culturally, adapt, but it's to the level of human degeneration, especially so, but always in the same ultimate meaning, right? Converging towards a unified goal. That's why people fundamentally don't understand, as I was saying before, the notion that there is an overarching Catholic tradition that continues from the Roman to the Christian one, making a synthesis out of them. Because they cannot afford to accept that the problem is them. Right? Christianity says what it says to fix what people did. Right? And there aren't people descending from, something that someone was not there at the time. You are the direct consequence of those people's sin. And that's why tradition had to modulate its expression accordingly, resetting the goals. This is present also in the Old Testament, right? God, for example, he tasks the Hebrews with specific objectives, and these fail, for example. And so God recalibrates. This is very much like you do with a child, right? As a father with your son, you want your son to succeed, and you set some stakes, right? And then, your child succeeds, and then at some point fails. So you understand to lower a little bit the stake, so that he can still proceed from his position and surpass that and grow and handle more and finally reach the initial, the step that he had failed. This is exactly what's going on with tradition. And again, the reason why people cannot afford to accept this, it's because they have been indoctrinated, they have been brainwashed into thinking that being a human being is normal. That you are normal, that the average person is good, that the average person is someone that is inherently valuable, even without accomplishment. So exchanging, very much like leftists do, that's why I say what contemporary conservatives are leftists, as a matter of fact, that they do not want to accept that the equality of opportunity and outcome are two completely different things. The right is doing exactly the same right now. The populistic mob is just, again, for testators, how you can define them. There is no real way, really, other than that. So there can be a succinct articulation of this, that the ancient tradition, symbolized by the Fasces Lictorius, elevates humanity to the essential plan through the completeness of man's faculties and cosmic abilities. Remember how grace proceeds. Ex patre per filio. In that, through the Holy Ghost, of course, and out of the merit, out of virtue, the success of the works that immediately mirror that value. Grace is immediate. It doesn't have, a lagging time. It immediately has this transfiguring power, allowing the divine light to penetrate, facilitating the holistic realization of the new man. And symbolically, this could represent a transition from the Taumata cross to the Latin one, for example, with the former being conceptually reducible to the dual-bladed axe. In other words, the Latin cross projects men towards God. It renders more concrete the elevation of God, through compensating for the gap that humanity has created with its further degeneration. This is incredibly important, right? We'll see it better. This is present also actually in other symbolism, but originally, there is a symmetry between the arms. And here, the meaning is truly from the human perspective in its further elevation. It is inappropriate to view, in fact, again, the Roman and the Christian tradition as adversarial or conflicting merely due to their historical confrontation. This is wrong at so many levels that we'll try to explain now, because, of course, like, people also stop to, but the Romans hated the Christians, they persecuted them. Well, yeah, because you don't know what the Catholic tradition means, or what happened to the empire, or what, happened with Christianity. At least you have the answer right there, but you need evidently a little bit of help. And of course, such mistaken viewpoint is narrow and unavoidably as fundamentally dismissive of tradition. You're actively mistaking history because you want to shift the attention towards your own personal shortcomings. So where are you? Why haven't you representated your magical world of value? Nobody seems to have really done that, right? And guess why? Because you are the direct continuation of that subversion, especially with this kind of thinking. So there is a sense, of course, of capacity of Christendom to, well, we have seen it in that video about the the syncope, I think, of antiquity or something, like about the end time, like the readjustment that essentially Christianity made for a humanity at large, that really everywhere, and surprisingly from also the general, if you come from the general pop cultural sense of the story, actually among those fringe peoples that you think would have actually fought for the older ideal, no, right? If you look at the Germanic peoples from their sort of encased paganistic beliefs in, again, as long as they didn't provide themselves with an oligarchic, like at least a really an imperial direction, remain like, fringe tribes at the edges of the world, like an incredibly dark reality. Until they became really sacred, with kings, with reges that were consecrated also by the same Romanity, with the gods are the Amalie, especially, like a beautiful example of. They converted to Arianism. They made this countercultural attitude. It's incredibly close to Protestantism. They were actually denying there. They were the ones who actually created more hypostasis. If you know Arianism from a doctrinal point of view, it's not like they were conferring more power to Christ, to the hero. No, they were actually stripping it away. So they were actually suggesting it was that it was more impossible, it was more difficult to succeed in divinity. So remember that. Because that's like the Romans believed that in Rome at the time. The Germans believed that. So that's mind-blowing if you perceive that sort of racialistic, we were actually better than the Romans, were moral superior. You weren't. Also because the Germans really didn't go as far as the Romans did, which is also self-evident. And that's also something you must historically explain. Not remaining in this passive-aggressive attitude of, but we broke down. We didn't really broke down civilization. That's not really what happened. It's not what the Germans did. We are all Germanic in ancestry in Europe, and we know better that of course civilization remained in Rome, remained in Mediterranean, and the rest of Europe was subsumed by the Catholic victory that Christianity was bearing on the wings of Romanity. And of course, Odin's eagle flew towards the same ones of Rome. Everybody knows that. The Roman, that's other myth, other BS that you're fed constantly in schools, is that Christianity was so concerned with crushing Odinic beliefs, right? Christianity was mostly concerned with crushing paganistic beliefs that had nothing to do with the Odinistic ones that were imperial and Catholic in nature. In fact, those who held them spontaneously converted to Christianity rather than being brought under. The Saxons being the only exception that I think of, at least in a broader provincial reality. The point being also that if those beliefs had really been still successful, and hadn't they, by the way, contained that notion, as we were saying before, of course, that these people themselves believed that they couldn't save themselves by themselves, whereas Catholic works still did think so. And the key there is true Christ, meaning that it's nothing about your own action is precluded, right? Nothing in terms of the procession of the Holy Ghost, that is Victoria, the winged glory, Nika, is eliminated by Christ. Christ is not making the homework for us. He's not making the work for us. He's transfiguring us, which is another, to a degree, that this is, of course, debatable in the extent. What happened there is that nobody was actually able to preserve that, to attain that level of divinity. So if you actually have any knowledge of tradition, where did that divinity stem from? Where does power stem from? The Holy Roman Empire was a great achievement of that, was the peak after Rome. In a marvelous peak of greatness. In the pneuma of properly of Latin, Germanic, partly also of Slavic Europe, when it was brought under Romanity, right, making some of the deepest intimate essence of so many Slavic peoples nowadays. This is extremely important. I would like to stress how relevant it is to our historical talks here, because it's not like I'm discussing this stuff just because, right? We are pointing out what happened, right? And even if we abstract here, because we're taking a more sort of esoteric direction, it has nothing to do with, remember, everything reflects the hierarchical relation of the two natures, right? And nothing that happens in the world is devoid of meaning. This we know also through history, and especially through history, right? So when you look also at the evangelization of Europe, we will come back on that, you will realize that, of course, the evolution of Christianity was a triumph over the decline of the Roman tradition, right? Christendom saved Catholicism in Romanity. There wasn't a separation, an elimination, right? We'll talk about the separation of the universal powers. That's another story, but that's human's fault, right? Christianity came about because just the times had come for that level of human degeneration, and also helping after the peak of the empire to salvage that. In fact, we also made so many videos explaining from the very sort of Christian sources of the time how Christians were overwhelmingly supportive of the Romanity of the empire. We do not find actually anybody say, okay, well, this empire should fall, other than, say, in a broader metaphysical sense, like everything earthly is doomed to the degree it does not look into God, but nobody was cheering for the destruction of the empire. Everybody supported it. If you read early Christian authors, there was an offer. If anything, there was a contrast between authorities because of the degree of absolute in which divinity had to be held in, but Christians were fine without Roman authorities told them, Christianize, it's going to be fine, we're going to maintain the empire, it's going to work. Equally, the pre-Christians, because calling them pagans again is deeply wrong under any historical, theological, religious point of view. They were Catholics, all right? They were non-Christian Catholics. They were saying, well, but we still got it. We still can hold the two, like, temporal and spiritual power in one, and the empire went downhill anyway, and so that's also when Christianity was subsumed or simply took over itself. Like it was a double threat product. It isn't like I don't know, Christianity won or defeated the empire. This is, for example, what Peterson indulges in, and all the other biblical exegesis telling you, look that here the Augustan Empire is a bit of a different thing, but Peterson is obsessed with this notion that the state is tyrannical and whatever, and he does not understand the world. Right? He literally rejects, that's hysterical, right? That's of course a puritanic, paranoid, distrust towards authority. It's one of the great prize of Christendom, in a broader cultural sense and beyond, to be obedient and towards an authority that upheld those certain standards differently from, for example, the Islamic world that is radically distrustful and paranoid towards every earthly endeavor, and this causes a massive secular instability, trying to maintain standards obviously humanity does not have, especially in that case, and this is radically important. I cannot stress how relevant this is, and it should be taught in every school, right? This is not a joke. This is probably the single most important aspect of the world. And so we can obviously see how the two traditions converge towards a unified goal, the Catholic one, the integrative realization of God. This is the entire point of the Crusades. It's still the Empire. It's still Victoria. It's the entire point of the monastic chivalric orders. It's the entire point of the Holy Roman Empire. As we well know from early and high medieval history, nobody at the time believed that Romanity had ended. Right? Everybody was aware of, at least in the Catholic spheres, how Romanity is inherent any power in both natures, and it does not die, and that it's the only gateway, just like with Christ, to attain divinity. There's a very specific meaning. Like, if Catholicism exists, say, at the beginning I said that, of course, many Catholics know absolutely nothing about this all. But it's just average people. Nobody cares about them. Here I'm talking about Catholicism as an institution. That continues the Romanity of divinity. And if you do not understand what this means in historical or theological terms, you do not belong to the world. Actually, you're outside the sacred. And there is a reason why a Catholic Church exists. It's not a random, now I will cosplay as this group or another. This is not about 3,000 confessions all believing a little thing and missing the point of it all. Divine unity. The weight of tradition. Do you understand that in Catholicism, explicitly, also in Christian terms, like you ask, these are the few things at least that also many Catholic priests really know at large well, that is to say that tradition predates Christianity. Do you realize that? Do you realize what it means? Like, this is something you can straightforwardly find also in your own church, or even I don't know, you can find any Catholic, question and answer stuff on YouTube. In Catholicism, tradition predates Christianity. Not just in the sense of course, like the veterotestamentary connection, which is contained within the broader Catholic horizon, but in the true sense that the Catholic tradition was already there before Christianity was there, regardless of its the latter's providential function. You can't be in the world without this. Like, seriously. Like, this is if you don't know that, it's a serious problem in your entire personal, moral, cultural background, and you should fix it very, very, very quickly. Because it's a matter of collective responsibility. We have discussed this also in other videos. I will not repeat myself more than much, but the insistence, for example, on the absoluteness of divine power in front of earthly matters. As we were saying before, they're never disconnected. In Christianity, you perfectly know how double-threaded they are, but the purpose of it is not, of course, the literalistic anti-say civilizational meaning at all. It's the reinforcement of the latter towards God, because it, as Christ himself proved, this cannot proceed without the transfiguration of man, right, and the victory over death, right? So Christendom was helping humanity to reacquaint its once neglected spirituality that brought, in fact, the empire to shrink. And this is also a broader perspective. Think about what happened in Eurasia at large during the migration year. What was the outcome of that? Aside from the syncrasies that, for example, for the West we highlight in the Latin Germanic world, like, was excellent in that sense, but in the sign of the Christian cross, that is also the same one of Rome, right? Literally at the time, but also in the pre-Christian sense, further developing its deeper meanings, in fact, and enhancing its creative essence. It was not meant to tame it; it was meant to liberate it from the deterministic, emptied constraints that this had acquired. Even if, of course, this is not to say, by the way, that Christianity did not happen in ways that, of course, reflected that malaise of the average people, the iconoclastic fury, the persecution of the same, say, those who believed in something was formally different from Christianity. This happened, right? But aside from the very shared, sort of the very shaded, and still, again, largely, like, the evangelization of Europe happened largely in a spontaneous way. This is particularly self-evident, especially in the measure in which it's not like there was an empire that went over conquering up to Scandinavia, right? So we will also analyze. Again, I made so many videos. Again, if you really listen to this video, for example, as my content for the first time, just know that I covered this in literally hundreds of videos. I'm not exaggerating. I mean, this is what Schwerpunkt is all about. But it's imperative that you acquire that notion, that you acquire that historical awareness and depth and image. It's not a fringe view. It's surely an uncommon view in the sense that the common layman does not know this. But this is inherent in the sort of educational, cultural, disaster that we live in. It's not like European elite for millennia did not believe this up to actually very few generations ago at large. So when you look at it, just be aware that there is stuff to learn. You're not the measure of what there is to learn. It's what is there that is the measure of what you should adapt to. And of course, it's always a divine standard that we all try to pursue, at least in a way or another, different levels. So when you look at the Romano-Christian tradition, because this is what we're getting to, you realize the shared context represented by Rome, underscoring a continuity in tradition. Rome is really the common denominator of all of this, but also the overarching authority in all of this, manifesting in various forms due to the natural and logical expression of sacred truth that takes different paths. For example, this truth inherently embodies different interpretations based on the complex nature of its aspect and the necessity to adapt to the respective times and places of its expression. That's why, to you, like at large, at least even from, because we have always been, I say you, because we've always been raised more or less in that anti-Christian, anti-traditional, anti-Catholic notion that at some point there were the pagans and the polytheists, and then you had the Christians and the monotheists. This I can confirm you again from a background in history of religions at some relatively quoted level, I would say, is completely nonsensical. It's not even that it's not accepted. It's completely not what religion is about. It's not what the frontiers of religious studies also analyze when they actually get there. Most religious studies today are run by some leftistic perversion. This is true, but it's not even like, I don't know, leftists do not accurately teach some aspects of Christianity. It's just that they do not teach others, including its Catholic meaning and the broader connection with. I'm the only person that I'm aware of. I'm sure there are others, but that investigates these specific topics. It's a notion of, if you have to study the history of Christianity, you can find so much, but it's that almost fractal paganistic tendency that makes you study a minimal thing about, I don't know, that author lost like in 11th century, what was his view with other works of the time, and studying the foundational meaning of Christendom and Catholicism and Romanity. That's a completely different thing. All right, they're properly, like, in terms of tools, of method, of general background, two radically different things. But it doesn't mean that we haven't already learned them. We're not discovering now. If anything, we are rediscovering from reading books from, I don't know, one generation ago, in times where this was common notion to the experts in the field, and that we abandon also because of, again, rampant Marxism in the 60s, in the 70s. taking over the universities, at least in a pseudo-cultural point of view. In fact, as I said at the beginning, I'm not really afraid of Marxism. I'm really afraid of people having no backbone, which is a very different thing. And I'm standing up to... Marxism is nothing, right? It's self-destruction, so it can't be something dangerous unless you are won over by that equally low amount of moral force. That produces Marxism as well, which is, however, instructionally destructive, right? It rolls backwards to any kind of Catholic tradition by definition. So it's not just like the temper of the time. So we were talking about this ideology just in the future as, but it was just the temper of the times, it just were reinvigorating Catholic tradition. No, this thing rolls backwards and self-destroys, because that's the ultimate outcome of these initiatives, so to say. So you have here a dual law of internal and external evolution, operating in also every aspect of tradition, aligning with the essence of truth, thus accessible in forms like for all people. This is also the truly, ecumenic but Catholic meaning of the Roman tradition. The emergence of Christianity cannot be considered without the Roman one, which serves as its essential foundation. The decline of the former tradition creates a demand for a new manifestation that reveals the underlying significance of the original, often appearing in contrast to it. And even talking about modern times, we realize that what we see, as I said it before, that what we see in the success of civilization, for example, cannot be disjointed from tradition. Many conservatives make this mistake. They think that everything that happened, in the last 200 years, or that for that matter was already beginning from quite a while, did not exist in fact before. Right? Communism, for example, is a constant. It happens also in history in different ways, but it's the same thing, really. There is aside from its current manifestation, at the core, it always follows that disintegration purpose. That, by the way, the celestial dimension is always called to counter and actually to use its forces that still exist as part of life to back the foundation of divinity. So the notion is that you should reject everything modern and secular, intended in the conventional meaning of modern and secular. This is also wrong, right? I will not now digress on the specific terminology, the same etymology of these terms, but again, everything that provides with power is traditional in every age. It's a metaphysical principle. It never changes by definition. So what we see now is actually a very promising consequence of what Christianity says. You can be disgusted by the current times. All human times are disgusting to a degree, and there is no doubt that we degenerated further, but it's not like we did so without achievement. That is fully within the wake of Catholicism, even if this is not really intended as such. Right? It's what we were saying before. Substance without form. Right? You can have people doing things right, but not knowing in which kind of tradition they operate, because, as we said, they literally have never heard it even exists, which seems a great waste of potential, indeed, as it turns out at the end of the day. So the demand for a new manifestation is also countering the notion that everything that has been established, for example, from a civilizational point of view, we should bail out from. The iconoclastic destruction, it's just what, again, you complain about having been done against, for example, Rome, in Roman tradition, in that sense of thinking that those who did damage, that were doing so in the name of the actual Catholic tradition. That's not true. right? Even when they were doing it in name of Christ, it wasn't about that. You always find people who fall short. Those were the times in which was the case, and we do not live in better times in interest of individual value. And in this sense, you should be able to separate the wheat from the chaff in accepting that there is nothing outside tradition working or manifesting power, right? So one cannot rationalize a shift from what is inaccurately labeled as polytheistic to an equally flawed concept of monotheistic, since true reality is singular, right? By the same fact that you're using these terms, you're buying into, for example, typically structuralistic language that is designed to relativize traditional meaning against Catholic tradition. Why do you think these terms emerge? Do you realize when they began to emerge in, say, academic language? What was the cultural temper when that happened? Who wrote this? When? In which countries? Which religious tradition? This specifically are terms designed to destroy Catholic traditional meaning. There is no such thing like polytheism or monotheism. These terms are designed to eliminate, through deterministic categorism, any pneumatic spirituality from scientific studies. Right? If you concentrate on this literal nonsense in the sense that it never existed historically, nor polytheism nor monotheism, you're just fixating on the concepts and trying to find meaning in a direction that is opposite to the unitary one of God. This is why, for example, I don't know, we're living in an academic crisis whereby there is just so much hyper-specialization that whatever people write has simply lost any meaning because it does not connect with the whole. It's not like that the individual info is not correct, but it's just a substance devoid of any form, unfitable into a hierarchy, if not properly remolded or molded to begin with. And we don't even realize that. They're just a functionalistic mechanism that brings people just to think that, I don't know, just like when they ask me to cite sources as if that was the degree of revealed the degree of or instantiated the degree of accuracy of my content. My content is accurate regardless of whatever I cite or don't cite. I often cite, as you know, and quote, and we do it very often. But in a video like this, for example, what is that you have to cite exactly? If you don't explain to people what this is all about. You see, if you trap the mind into, but who said this? Or where do you base yourself from? We can't, I mean, I make under the videos also overabundantly citing specific texts and beyond. This is just not the video in which we do it. But again, if you don't watch the channel, you don't realize that you entered a massive library. The question is, the problem is yours. And this is always the problem. It's always yours. It's always you. And the more you insist in that sclerotic formalism, the less you will achieve any actual knowledge. Right? Knowledge does ultimately stem from authority. It's not like, for example, history is sculpted again on some magical tables somewhere, right? That's not how it works, right? And if you deny that, it's because you deny your own spiritual power. So mission accomplished, structuralism, Marxism, and everything that they wished you to reason like, they achieved. And this is terrible and terrifying. Now, the uniqueness of God makes it illogical to reduce him to a mere numerical figure as well. You cannot quantify moral forces, as we well know also from von Clausewitz. It would be more precise to say that as the Roman tradition, let's put it in this way, deteriorated, a model emerged between the cosmic and the divine. This is also what confused so many Christians that were already confused before Christianity arrived, and that kept confusing themselves regardless of the Catholic tradition. That was exactly what they were falling short from themselves. Never eliminate individual responsibility. If you think that history is just some sort of, again, magical mist that happens over people, congratulations, you're just bought into deterministic superstition, which is exactly what the actual polytheistic pagans, so those who deterministically worshipped pieces of stone, being afraid and paranoid of any authority, because they realized they were the ultimate, the last element of the chain, that really never achieved anything, right? If not under the redemptional offer that the chieftains provided in their imperial Catholic leadership, you will remain stuck in, right? That's why, for example, why don't you today realize the continuity of the Fasces Lictorius with the Christian cross? Because of course you have lost the cognition, the knowledge of the true essence of symbols. This is true for Janus, Arc, etc. Before people knew that, right? I can't stress this enough. One of the most important aspects in history is realizing what people actually believed at the time. Since you have especially been forbidden to study this stuff, or at least you have been effectively prevented from learning, because this stuff is not written on school books. They're not really taught in at least some university manuals, etc. You have to look at authors that the current trend would say, like, but those were back in the day, they were ideological. Study what they say. Their historical work, their basis of research, their sources. It doesn't matter what they believed in life, which was also quite varied and very often misrepresented, mischaracterized. Yes, there were the bad ones. They were the ones who indulged, in fact, into anti-traditional, socialistic, nationalistic, in fact, deterministic, materialistic, fortestator superstitions that included also racism, social determinism, even though also in that there is a pinch of truth, because otherwise you wouldn't have life altogether. It's impossible to write something that wouldn't have any meaning whatsoever in the wake of tradition, just as we would be all dead by that point. You should be aware that there is a space of history, and an extensively documented one, printed one, in the generation of our grandparents, that is largely available to study this stuff. It's not occult, it's not niche, it's really like foundational. You can make many names, right? But even if you study, I don't know, for example, Dumezil was very structuralistic, even in his own kind. Again, you see there the creeping of the complexity, of the difficulty, of the doubt. But you cannot, of course, cross out decades of research in Indo-Europeistics just because these are famous names. If you don't know them, again, your problem. A person studying history of religion knows, whichever political orientation they are, whatever, that this is a pillar of history of religion. Then what you do with him is another story. What these people would do with him is another story, but nobody, at least now conventionally in academies, denies that. So it's a very different thing from, I don't know, lingering on some sort of fringe theory that is also incorrect. In any case, obviously what shifted like the attention from the Roman Christian tradition is this neglect causing a rift in between doctrine and ritual superficialities, as well. Right also acquired to a degree deterministic, materialistic direction. Remember that the rite is sacred because of he who officiates it, not because it's an action, but because why it's done and by who, right? How divine grace is vehiculated through that, right? And if you have this neglection, everything will result in a misleading multiplicity characterized by false deities, like the aforementioned idea that it was paganism, or polytheism, or monotheism. These are concepts that do not make any good in a linear moral and scientific research of history of religion. The adaptability of forms, a hallmark of, say, classical antiquity, has been also termed, think about that, also led to a straying from the authentic traditional hierarchy, where what you would conventionally call magic gained undue significance relatively to its transient nature, contrasted with the foundational metaphysical principles that underpin sacred science. And we will come to that. I mean, I am myself relatively new to this stuff, but it's not like I haven't began to try something. Now, when the Romans conquered the Levant themselves, for example, they exposed themselves to various traditional forms with deep meanings that already at the time humans at large failed to comprehend. We're more or less, in fact, in the same time in which Christ was born, and that, as we said before, like the entire world at that point had already lost a great part of that foundational knowledge. The elites would be more aware of that. We've seen very often with Augustus told, for example, of Alexander's corpse. We'll not repeat ourselves. So there was clearly, as we'll see now, a knowledge expressed by Virgil, Horace, Ovid, etc. Like they remembered, but they were an elite, and the world was not really meeting the entire picture. That's how, for example, I don't know, even Nietzsche believed that at some point he makes this terrible mistake thinking that Mithras cult was, I don't know, a oriental, decadent, racially inferior degeneration of tradition that was essentially eroding Romanity together with the other Pelasgian, deterministic, feministic, communistic ideologies towards the later Roman Empire, right? So if Nietzsche, of course, it's not like Nietzsche was necessarily that overwhelming, charismatic figure that we should. I mean, he was charismatic, but it stops there, right? And in fact, these mistakes, together with, I don't know, in The Birth of Tragedy, he wrote the entire knowledge. He corrected it later, but the relation between Apollonian and Dionysian, he completely mischaracterizes that. It makes something similar to monotheism and polytheism. He sclerotizes them, separates them, and sees them as two opposites, just being one from one side, one for the other, denying the hierarchical corporative function that and the inherent, vertical quality there that existed in tradition between them, and the fact that there couldn't be a divine attainment without the subordination of the Dionysian, in function, however, of the success of the Apollonian that had achieved that glorious victory over the last. We also talked about it recently in the symbology of the Indo-European horsemen in the centuries before Christ. So, with the iconography of St. George, for example, like spawning at that point, iconographically speaking, but being, in fact, the product of a much more spiritually ingrained and imbued knowledge and doctrine, right? So you see how much there is about this world, how much misunderstanding, how many gross exaggerations, how much really fear, because that's the greatest sin, right? So the Romans themselves, whoever you want to call them, we talk often about the centrality of the Roman-Italic people, but say here now the inhabitants of this ecumenic empire allowed, in large part, themselves, like all the other peoples around, to be swayed by superficial cultic practices that crept into their culture, creating a kind of veritably idolatrous amalgamation that detached them from the essential symbols of their ancient tradition. Most people are still there, by the way. All right, and so, as we were just saying, during the Augustan era, particularly through, of course, the greatest works in the history of mankind, in the Latin tradition, Virgil, Horace, Ovid, we mentioned them on many occasions in the videos about the Romano-Italic Indo-European legacy and more. There was a reassertion, together with the Golden Age, that was prophetically to happen between, in fact, the Bronze and the Iron one again. This is the Augustan one, the Saturnia Tellus, truly being restored in all its order after the sin of the civil wars that had spelled, like, the Sibylline oracles. Thus, why would chosen peoples kill one another and, in fact, threaten the entire Catholic reunion of the world in one that Caesar and Augustus re-achieved? A traditional Roman identity, alongside a deeper understanding of its original expressions. Many people even ignore that, Livy, for example, is telling us about the actual Roman sagas. They do not have the palest idea that in that story it's contained some of the deepest essence of Indo-European Kenningar, right? If you study Camillus, if you say, we have seen this in different videos about the Indo-European etymologies, for example, the same Roman political and institutional terms. You can realize there the prorompent power that took over the entire universe under Augustus. Now, awareness grew that Christianity, by incorporating elements of the old, would bolster and expand Rome's role in the world. This is really how it happened. There are, again, some aspects you can criticize in how this happened, because, again, it was a human dimension. There is no human dimension that is beyond criticism. In any case, there was a delineation developing between those knowledgeable of the doctrine, of the original Catholic doctrine, and the mere adherence to these materialistic, scaramantic rituals, as expressed in, for example, beautiful Virgil's expression in the Aeneid, procul o procul este profani. He used to say, you profane, like stay away, right? There is an initiatic role, there is a principle of Holy Ghost procession by authority and initiation. And this is in many ways what, again, the world began to deny exactly at that time, just by its natural degradation, at least its subnatural degradation of mankind. And that's why a true traditional crisis emerged alongside the increasing power of Rome, while a new spiritual movement from east to west, like the eagle's fly, ensured the continuity of sacred spirit with the advent of Christianity that subtly sustained Romanity, revealing its endless depth. It's also beautiful that this compenetration was possible within the Catholic understanding of these currents, right? That were feeling ecumenically at the time within the wake of tradition, of the sole possible divine tradition. This process resulted in a removal of idolatrous practices that cleared the temple of false gods. I mean, I made videos about how paganism was, again, mostly persecuted, and also like with the limits of the time in that rural dimension, but how, let's say, the upper level of that level of, at least, of politistic idolatry, materialistic representation, if that is the only politism we can think of, was actually negotiated, in as much as there were some Roman traditionalists that stressed the capacity of this tradition to survive by itself. But you could bitterly say that in the measure in which it failed to do so, at least in that aspect, it had to be epurated. So much so that Romanity remained. Romanity was actually enhanced by this process. Rome never lost its centrality, in European civilization, actually, those are the centuries in which Latin Germanic world especially is forging a bond that goes beyond, I would like to stress this, the boundaries of the empire, just legalistically or territorially, say, boundarily intended, and that, in fact, forged a Europe that went beyond the boundaries of the same original empire. We've made lots of videos about this. This naturally reflects also the divine retribution in terms of imperial grace, the fact that the empire also was reborn in the West, Roman. The Franco-Papal tradition is pretty eloquent there, and again also the Romano-Germanic one as such, right? So in its also post-Carolingian dimension. So we're talking about very specifically macroscopic topics in polities and realities. We're not being vague here. There is a very self-evident framework for all this in any history manual. And this did bring to the shattering of the dense materialism that had obscured humanity's understanding of its origins and purpose, which always happens when, in fact, average people are not maintained under a very specific discipline and under a very specific authority, right? And if this authority succeeds in being so, it's because it's functional, because people give it support. And then there is the comparison between authorities and polities, and we know how, we've seen in many videos, Western civilization, the Latin Germanic world boomed, right? In the reactivation of Eurasian civilization, in the High Middle Ages, the Latin Germanic world boomed and overwhelmed the Byzantine and the Arab one. This truly signified, like, the Romanity of the empire was intact, right? This was a novus ordo, a new order, right? Remember the Age of Order. I made a video about this for the Romano-Celto-Germanic religion, how it's mostly expressed in the Roman sources, but also talking about these, say, barbarians that, however, the italics were not so snappish like the Greeks do, indicating as just in a negatively denying sense. On the contrary, we've seen in the video about the Imperial Germanic Catholic miracle, how the Germans managed to reinvigorate in Latinity that pneumatic Catholic tradition. And this novus ordo represents a return to the same Saturnian age. We will talk also about in another video. A true restoration of tradition meant to preserve sacred science as the keeper of truth in a defense against secular encroachments. In other words, if you are to conquer the world, can you make it? This is the challenge. The church is there to back you if you succeed. But if you don't, it simply means that ipso facto, you're not worth it, because there is no dualistic heresy. There is no power of God and power of somebody else. There is only God's power in the universe. And if you fail, as the guy who has to take over something, it's because there is something wrong in your discipline, in your order, in how you are behaving. This is the role of the church in the Middle Ages. It's not antagonistic, more than, I don't know, a healthy antagonism in order for mutual development must exist, for example, in a couple, right? And when there is, in fact, the man leading and the woman comforting, the true meaning of the temporal and spiritual syncresis that in the Roman Empire had been one, and that because of this step in the collapse of human standards had to split universal authorities for making them cooperate, right? And turning, in that sense, in the most successful civilization of all, because it perfectly tuned in that level of humanity that could take the next step, and almost succeeding, right, in re-mirroring the full Romanity of the empire as it had existed in historical times, differently from other civilizations, where, for example, the church was oppressed, like in the Greco-Byzantine world, or in Islam, where you don't even have a priesthood, and again, everything is sort of maintaining this higher, expectation that, however, dramatically falls short all the time. Look at what happened to the caliphate. As soon as it, overstretched, it's a completely different political institutional history, also cultural, spiritual one the West really had. And so you can argue that the distortion of the human cosmic relationship, so to say, into which earthly, let's say humanity in Roman times, to say better, had lapsed, dissipated, say, Romanity later in its decadence, right? It dissipated in light of the spiritual steadfastness of Christianity that reinvigorated, restored that Romanity in full. This is, again, incredibly important, because some of those who claim to be Romans failed, inasmuch they failed to understand this continuity. In part because there had not really been Rome, right? The centrality of Rome here, also in a physical and metaphysical sense, is crucial. Rome is not in Constantinople, right? Rome is not in Jerusalem. Rome is only Rome. Also in pre-Roman times, because it transcends time, right? So what had degenerated into a mere power structure within the physical representation of divinities reverts to being veritably, in Christian Rome, the Vestigia Dei, a tangible trace of God which remains distinct from, or incapable of being fully integrated into it, simply a shadow or suggestion of the divine. Of course, the ultimate fulfillment of divinity being distant still from humanity. Humanity is still fallen, humanity is transfigured in this process by many acts of transfiguration, as we know, and there is an ultimate depth, of course, in the Christian one. What is important here is realizing today we'll not talk so much about that, but the gateway to divine, the connection to God, right? Some people say that you have to essentially return to a state of childlike faith, but it's incorrect, right? A child may understand this in a way but it's the primitiveness of the knowledge that must be restored. When you're a child, you're not aware of so many things. You're still unspoiled in many ways. You're still ingenuous. Then you know, then you learn, and you must do so. And that will bring a lot of chaos at the beginning, but then you will recompose this, and it's in that primitive order of wisdom, not in an involution or in a childlike level of development, but in this renewed birth. This is the state of childlike faith that we understand. You can restore the golden age and the Edenic peace that was forfeited throughout the choice to live merely as human beings, as mortals, for our own will, not just fault, rejecting, because there aren't really two separated things of that kind, rejecting our own true nature as bearer of the divine power itself that grants its dominion over creation. This is also fundamental, really, as it is the renewal of tradition that cannot be achieved merely by reverting to the existing one, at this formalistic sense, because the form is there, right? The form can vary as much as the substance, but it's mostly the latter that lacks. Like, it's the primal force that dims, right? And it's all one, just like in the fuses. But of course, the moral dimension, or at least the one that we understand in this sense, is overwhelming compared to the materialization of our limits, right? And so there is a cyclical expression that has already reached its conclusion with the rise of dominant Romanity, that we must understand historically now on the basis of our current condition. So it's not simply a restoration of Rome as we historically knew her at the peak of the empire in Augustus' times. It really, right? Because it's not just about the territorial extent. It's not just about Trajan. It's not these simply material dimensions. It's the top of the balance of power. That is at the same time the true soundness of its peak, right? Regardless of just because you can't even trace this in an extensional way, right? This also has to do with other people living beyond the Roman frontiers, right? It always changes. They also have their peak. Also, humanity has this almost chronological parallelism with one another. We've seen it often. The events of the world are often going in parallel in the greater civilization. Now, the deeper symbols of Romanity had in a sense become obscured with the inaccessible knowledge of the profane masses, hence the aforementioned Aeneid's quote, as the masses were entirely absorbed in superficial and deceptive externalities. Reminds you of any particular time in history, consequently, a new resonance emerged, shedding light on the significance of the entire ancient achievement, let's say, denying what had devolved into a genuine cosmic dissipation characterized by a decentralization, for example, creative power, leading to humanity's evident inferiority in comparison to the intricate creativity of which humans had become mere passive and float reflections. Remember the layer. Remember the eternal sort of spiraling towards the abyss that this ever shallower, paler reflections of divine perfection really are. So rather than mastering this creative power, that man became a victim of the tyranny of conspicuous idols that humanity thought that to be now just operating in their own stead, right? Hence also idolatry in that also a legitimate iconoclastic rejection towards at least that level of icon, depending on what this again had been believed, because the icon is a mirror of man, right? So there are many aspects you can appreciate of this, but there's also the ultimate teaching faction, like the doctrinal relevance of this imagery. In fact, also much of that world's work of art and symbols were preserved. There is a reason for this. So the poets, the Vatas, a select few who were partly or wholly aware of tradition, had to mask it behind a dense web of symbols whose meanings eluded understanding at times, especially the one of the masses. When you read, the Aeneid, still today, it's not like most translations or critical editions really report the mere meaning. There is that passage in the end when Turnus dies, and he's about to die actually, he doesn't find, there is a she that is not specified by Virgil, and riding on the chariot, according to you, who was she? That would be the equivalent of the Scandinavian field sword, the transfigured soul, victory, that was alluding, like Turnus, that whose soul was instead like dragging him down towards the abyss because of succumbing to the darkest forces within and not managing to transfigure them, different from the Aeneid. Well, that passage is not often, like, you don't even find that that she is Victoria. Just for saying that even when you think you read a text like the Aeneid, and you're essentially just hoping that we know everything about it, right? Well, that's actually not the case, or at least it's so easy to understand that if you have a minimal of traditional initiation, but still, like those who are conventionally deputed to teach you do not even tell you something so bad. So we can say that the myth or symbolic representation of divine transcendence was perceived in a tangible sense as the drama of creation in its multifaceted volatility, where action triumphed over contemplation and vague sensitivity overshadowed the achieving intellect. As Rome was tumultuously welcoming a new dawn, the waning ancient tradition flickered to the clouds, casting fiery rays that still unveiled the revered protective deities already obscured by encroaching darkness. Under Virgil's influence, the symbols of ancient Rome were rediscovered in their hidden meanings, as we were just, for example, pointing out, like still eluding part of the contemporary scholarship, seemingly awaiting for this rising sun to reveal himself. Made multiple videos about the Sol Invictus and this, again, of course, the new Phoebus Apollo that is sung by the same Virgil, that would actualize the same hidden meanings within the unifying totality of the cross. This is naturally also what Christian commentators read Virgil like, and that's the same reason why we have Virgil, by the way, and so that's why Christians did salvage what was evidently part of the Catholic tradition as well. And again, there was, lots of human shortcoming, lot of precious things being destroyed. It's one of the most horrifying chapters in the history of mankind. There is no way to condone them. This has nothing to do with Christianity per se. So remember how many wrong things can be made in the name of something that you don't understand. In fact, it has nothing to do with the point. Now, the metaphysical depth of this symbol, by the way, to decipher, right, for a mature civilization, as it would happen in the Middle Ages, in fact, that were all but unaware of this, disclosed the hidden identity of Rome, encapsulated in the aforementioned dual-faced center of Janus, the key holder, safeguarded by the formidable arcane power of the double-headed axe. Again, the Roman Indo-European axe, the fasces, among the 12 rods of the cosmic and solar belt along which the noble theory of the fasti as well unfolded. What is fast, right? Can it be done? Is it licit? Right? What kind of rule disciplines this? Romanity preserved that. Catholicism preserved that. All right. And the cross thus led the imperium back to the regnum and humanity to God in the universal context of the sublimating and radiant power aligned along the verticality of being, which was existentially realized, channeling existence into the center of the heart, of the art, not of the earth, devoid of all accumulations and fully permeated by the Spirit of God. When we will talk about Janus, everything will be clearer, right? There is an enigma, and that is the very limit of our human understanding, in fact, of the divine, in the most sacred cornerstone of Romanity. Janus bidimensionality finds resolution in the crucial tridimensional mystery, situating the concealed name of Rome at the center, harmonizing the supernal and the infernal along a plan of expansive horizontality. Remember that. It's like in the Clausewitzian Trinity. This is really the spirit of the Catholic Trinity. You have a higher nature, a lower nature, and in between you have a gambler, you have a pursuer of fortuna, mater et filia deorum, that is to connect constantly. It's the same concept of the Pontifex Maximus, he who builds bridges, right, to bridge exactly humanity with God, in his utmost virile, truly holy Catholic, Apostolic, and Roman virility, right, and mankind, and doing so through these different axes, right? There is a reason, a superior, higher reason, and there is a primordial soup almost that must be ordered. And in theory, in between, there is this instrument of action. There is also the one that has to perpetually self-sacrifice through what is given as a ruler, through, in fact, also his his virtuous attainment of divine grace from the decisive moral majority of the people who's going to support him. This mediatorial position served as the foundation for two triangles, and there is all a numerology and geometry in the cosmic centrality of Rome in the universe, right? There is not, of course, a random. Two triangles, one is ascending and the other descending, right? And so you have also there the David's cross that is also you find in many churches in Rome, right? And it's also an original Indo-European symbol that the Israelites did acquire back in the day. It's incredibly relevant. You find it hidden somewhere. Also, for example, when you visit Roman churches, you find it hidden even on the pavement. If you look at the floor, like the ceiling, you will find this in a non-obvious way, right? And the meaning is that these triangles, of course, are both equal and symmetric, yet contrasting. One comes from the top down, one from the bottom up, and the vertices of the first directed towards the world and the second towards the supra world, representing, of course, the poles of a singular divine reality disclosed to the new man, the integral man, the one who has fully actualized himself and thus attained divinity in the most heroically glorious fashion. The perceived contradiction between the contemplative and active life is just an illusion. You need both, as always. It also emerged, for example, from a misunderstanding of Rome's eternal function and a lack of awareness of her traditional unity, which, contrary to popular belief, was not merely a succession of overlapping attitudes and historical developments driven by an external reality of mere temporal succession. That's how you really see Roman history. That's how you've been told. That's how you have been. It just happened. It had it had to happen for some strange reason that you can't even pinpoint or explain. It just like one of the others. That's how we have been trained to reason, because you had to be hidden this ancestral archetypal meaning. Instead, Rome was an illumination that unveiled the various facets of a singular truth reflected in mankind, providing abundant evidence of the same mankind's engagement in the unfolding of the divine plan for those who grasp the significance of the same Catholic tradition. Thus, it's also obvious how the essence of Rome was foundationally conceived to harmonize the eternal and temporal aspects found within these two traditions, and again, as Rome as the point of junction between heaven and earth in her constant phoenix renovation, as we've seen also in other videos, for example about Vesta's fire, that are all one with this principle of eternal transfiguration. Again, the only one that can establish a traditional unity, where each aspect is hierarchically integrated in a corporative way, just the same one of the fasces. And this system allowed for essentially the activity of life, guided by the law of symbolic correspondence dictated by God, as expressed through rites, to be validated as a commitment of mankind to the truth, even considering the limitations of the world in its external and marginal development from the sacred citadel of God. Again, the Saturnia Tellus, Romanity, the herbs, the Pomerium. These aspects we will also see better in another video. And so there would be a tension. You know that, of course, this is in the hands of mankind. So naturally, because of all the vicissitudes of our world, conflict would arise if active life were viewed solely as the profane realm, while contemplative life represented the sacred. Right? In the purest expression of Catholic tradition, I'm writing an article just in these. I actually finished it. You may even read it at some point, surprise, surprise, about how this was still alive, for example, in the Ghibelline tradition of the Holy Roman Empire, like the necessity of treating action and contemplation as a whole. This is especially the case of the monastic military orders, that in fact were the elite of medieval Christian forces. And this is true also in a, again, general sense. You cannot do without both. They all reflect one another, but there shouldn't be a, let's say, an unbalance. Unless, of course, like, it depends on who you are, what can you want to achieve in terms of path to transfiguration. There are different ones, but in many ways, if you are more or less unbalanced towards one another, your task is to correct, rebalance the view. And Rome is really the indicator. This is also very important as far as the understanding of the Ghibelline Guelph struggle is concerned, again, the relation between the empire and the papacy, because if you suggest that, I don't know, either action or contemplation contains by themselves all error, or error to begin with, because you have also a quality level, right? So there is always error humanly, but this is also the pathway to its correction, right? So if you believe, and this is a very widespread belief nowadays, I mean, there is really a Manichaean heresy spreading in the world. It's either in a way or another, it's either black or white. That's not how it works. Right? Again, as I said before, if you have ever read the Gospels thinking that that's actually what it says, you're not a Christian. You cannot afford to be a Christian. You don't even know what it's about. Right? Starting from especially the lowest sort of fourth estate mythology, such as that Christianity is pacifistic or communistic, right? It's the diametrically opposite truth of this. But in any case, there is a harmony, because this balance is contained within that formula. Also, for you to find your own path, right? So there is no such thing like, again, either action or contemplation containing all error or holding all truth, respectively, and vice versa. This would be a contradiction, where one aspect denies the other, which is anti-Catholic by definition. It's anti-traditional by definition. It does not consider divine unity and perfection as the perfect fusion between the two, which is congruently constitutive of these elements that were all one before the fall. Right? So they shouldn't be seen as oppositive pieces. Again, this is not dualistic heresy. It's not just there is an incredibly large amount of lesser people nowadays that discovered that Ghibellinism existed, and they don't understand anything about it, nothing about tradition, not about Catholicism or medieval history to begin with. And they think that, I don't know, the Guelphs were the bad guys and Ghibellines were the good guys. it doesn't mean anything from a historical point of view. We can even make the point that, of course, one was better than the other, but it has nothing to do with the vilification of one another, right? They all exist in the functional approach. Just again, man and woman, sun and moon, these were the actual metaphors also used at the time and beyond. And they're always compenetrating one another. The papacy of the empire actually supported one another all throughout, right? They don't even ever break, regardless of moments of crisis in the 14th century where the entire sort of bigger medieval civilization cracks. It's just a shrinking of power. They necessarily recognized each other as legitimate. If anything, at most they would declare unfit those who covered the office, which is the correct also view, a Catholic view of power. That's, well, the fact also the Protestants deny, because they do not understand the function of tradition. They don't understand why there must be a church, an authority, and a hierarchy, and an empire. From there, if you leave that, already believing that you couldn't save yourself by yourself was a huge deal, and not succeeding, of course, being a huge deal. But if you eliminate that, it's over. It's what you see, in fact, in the world largely today, which is a tendency. This is not just about Protestantism. Many Catholics, in a sense, reason in equally, say, in ways that have an equal outcome to that. In fact, also in this, we must understand why we arrived to that point. So there is surely an antagonistic position. There is surely, like, again, in the Guelph-Ghibelline struggle, a problem with the... It's different. You can't simply draw parallelism in there. But there are also some fundamental dynamics that correspond to this sabotage and shortcoming, denial, reaction, or something that the broader picture sometimes is too complex to immediately grasp. But that's also why I make this video, so don't freak out. In any case, if we analyze the role and the approach of Rome, we find that active life can be seen as a monumental staircase ascending to the temple itself. This was the case for literally the victorious, the triumphing Roman emperors. That's literally what they did. They won on the battlefield, they transfigured to a degree, and they brought all this power back to the temple of Jupiter. That would bestow this upon the entire humanity to further expand its power, augment it. Where contemplative life unfolds, revealing no conflict or opposition, but rather a singular goal that active life prepares for and contemplative life fulfills. In fact, the same Scipio would be Africanus exactly in this context, spent before his final campaign against Carthage this importantly long time meditating in the same temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus in Rome, talking to God, and in fact achieving what hardly any other Roman commander achieved in a strictly military sense in Roman history, or in history to begin with. So it's something that, as a completion, of course, also a broader path there. So you understand how action and contemplation actually compenetrate one another. When we define God's law as the overarching guideline that directs activities, traditionally perceived as preparation for the sacred rather than a hindrance to it, and wisdom as the manifestation of truth achieved through active engagement rather than mere passive contemplation, it becomes clear that there is no opposition between these two realms. This is, again, very relevant when you think about also the current criticism towards civilization. There can't be human accomplishment without order, without authority. It doesn't mean anything. It's not like if humanity's out there without a leader, humanity improves. Like the entire collapse of moral standards occur, like the most underdeveloped peoples, the ones that show less imperium, that have less, say, fuel from God, are exactly the ones that do not have this kind of capacity. They're the ones that do not achieve, do not learn, do not... European elite once was real elite. They really ruled. They really were above the others, right? They were really hyper-educated. Think about now how the average person thinks about this. They're phobically and hysterically threatened by that, because it confronts them with standards, with law, with knowledge. And they can't be different. Like, law is attained through some contemplative approach, and wisdom through action. But they culminate, right? And of course, as far as they're human, in the sense that humans make them in order to come closer to God from earth, until they are in God, they cannot be perfect law and knowledge, right? But despite their distinct actions, it's like following in the stairway to heaven. Both converge towards the same objective. How high you climb, but it's just about you. It's not about the metaphysical existence of these eternal realities. Fidelity to the traditional unity that directs life towards a continuous alignment with the divine is the only duty of man, the one through which God delivers the golden wings of victory. Why is the law important? Why should you obey the law? Because the law eliminates arbitrariness, right, which misrepresents true freedom. True freedom belongs only to God. So again, it's not like you should, in earthly terms, obey whichever law or whichever order is given to you. It's always a power struggle, and you should always fight for achieving true freedom, but not in the sense that you must destroy what is above. You must build the above, in which you have to be yourself. That's the only way to God, right? Destroying civilization means to destroy yourself, right? And if anything, you should be realizing that all you have is not freedom as a human, but liberty. And liberty, if you know also the Latin etymology of the term, is the only one in which you can be nurtured and cultivated and grown into a higher capacity, condition, status. And this can happen only through the law, through the recognition that there is always a greater force, that is not just God's. It's always God's, but in the lower nature, it's represented by earthly power. And this earthly power is always, compared to that, always better than worse. Meaning that even when this law is exercised by an authority that is turned to evil, this authority is there still for a reason. Is still there for actually successfully attained divine power. And so when it falls, it may fall out of its own problem, and at the same time its own demerit, and falling short of, in fact, divine standards, and or which may not actually even have to do with your own achievement or you having done anything positive to bring it down, or having acquired power instead. But even when you want to defeat it, even when you want to challenge it, because you think you have a good idea and this better idea is correct, you will win, and God will give you power to rule yourself, right? So remember, it doesn't make any sense to pretend humans to live freely. Not just because they can't, by definition, and they won't. They will always control one another, but because as long as they are humans and they're not one in God, this freedom is false freedom. It does not exist. It's just it's a mental disease, is an alienation from reality, is a shortcoming of the individual and of its collective race. It just reveals the cultural inferiority of a people, just like isolationism, just like this general, again, distrust and paranoia towards any meaning. And it leads only to eternal death, not eternal life, right? There is always a dragon to slay, something to learn from authority. Even when it's antagonistic, even when it eventually falls, you will have to gain something out of it. And this is what the entire tradition is based on: sacrificing, fighting, getting power from the defeated. Not from anyone, but from the better one. Right? Because everything, as long as it's not God, can always be defeated. Right? And there's nothing harder than defeating yourself. To self-sacrifice yourself to rejuvenate in absolute power. Now, genuine freedom is, of course, also, like in this theological sense, existing within a transcendental framework achieved through wisdom in the same way. Like, so it's never about some idealistic, intellectualistic, theoricistic endeavor. It is about knowing what, handling the imperium actually is, right? If you have never done it, you can't know what it is, and it's so often, out of the reach of the average person that that's also the reason why so many people distrust power and again end up in the places where they are, right? So practice, knowing how to wield power, not needing to abstractly explain that, but to actually know how to wield. It's something that you actually learn in every endeavor, right? Like history. It's just, things begin to be evident to you even by intuition at some point. The more you go on, not at the beginning. At the beginning, you really don't understand things and you're searching for answers. Then you start getting how the thing goes, especially when you actually compare it to models of inquiry. Of course, there are people, supposedly adult people, that think that they know it all and they haven't understood anything about it all, but they're content to act themselves as if everything fit their narrative. It doesn't, right? That's not how it works, and you can understand how, and they will fall. Like any narrative from these people will crumble. When you know how to handle power, you just wield it. It's yours to take because God has bestowed His grace on you for it. It may be a little thing. It may give you power. It may give you fame. It can manifest in any way in that sort of force, but it's still attained, right, in very concrete fashion. So if you look at love, this functions as a precursor to wisdom, at least in human terms, because it and also in divine terms, meaning that, of course, the first in human terms, because people are born without knowledge of how things in fact work. This knowledge, wisdom. Between the two natures, because the higher nature, the heavenly one, is foundationally legal, right? And so it's the lower one, that has to gain that knowledge in order to understand why obeying the law is crucial, right? And so law actually in the world has this obvious functionality because people do not know how to handle themselves. It's ridiculous to pretend otherwise because they're human beings. And so even though there's always a better way to do things, in many ways the most effective way is to brutally enforce the law in a violent way on these people, right? And this actually would be extremely effective. Think about, the military. Think about all the greatest militaries in the world, like the effective ones, the ones who win, who conquer massive empires. They all stem from civilization. They have a hell of a law, and they are living better than anybody else. And their empires last, right? They're not just sudden waves turning again into a mess, right? So restricting arbitrary behavior is actually an earthly duty into divine transfiguration. Because otherwise humanity would distort itself further. If you leave humanity at itself, its sin will prevail, right? And so there is this collective, in fact, Catholic law that is exactly aimed at establishing these ecumenic standards. Because the larger the more objective the standards all over the world, the greater, first of all, the challenge to uphold them, and so the necessity, the pressure of refining them, and also the most obvious would be the annihilation of relativism, because people will not think that suddenly, everything is normal just because they feel it. And this is exactly what we see today. Again, I'm really going heavy at X now, but open X and look at what people engage in. These are evidently distorted human beings, right? It's not normal. I mean, being human is not normal, but in many ways, this is the further spiraling into nothingness. It's not like there aren't capable, powerful people, but at large, humanity follows this instinctive self-hatred into degrading itself, and so the law must be imposed to enforce this. And this is very interesting, because even those, this is not about libertarian movements or whatever, I've been criticizing them for any reason, but it's like people, I want to respect the Constitution, so I want to be free. This is not what the Constitution tells, right? The Constitution tells that there must be a way these fundamental liberties must be enshrined and preserved, and this can happen exclusively by intervening. So, of course, also a repressing fashion when people infringe on these conditions, right? What's the point, for example, like of pursuing happiness? Like if somebody can, for example, limit your own happiness, you can make it a liminal point, but everybody say limit their own happiness. We know how much injustice is out there. So it's like, pursuit of happiness is leaving people out there grazing in the grass like cows and pretending that everything will go well. Have you ever looked at what an average person is and how disgusting they are? And do you think that, there is no justice to exercise? These are not angels. And even angels wouldn't be God, right? So let's realize what the dignity of mankind is, with which humanity has zero to do. And of course, these limitations require individuals to seek true freedom still. It's not like it stops to, we must just repress this bunch of animals, cowing them into obedience. That's not how it works. Lesser people work like that. In lesser peoples, lesser cultures, lesser countries, the degree of ungovernability of a people is, how much they need to be repressed and zeroed in order to obey, right? Better people have more classically liberal, not leftist or liberal in the more left-leaning direction, systems to work. From liberus, from libertas, properly the Latin term, the foundational term, indicating not pure absolute freedom, that again belongs only to God, but the one of evolving under a master. This is what actually liberal means. It has to do with the hierarchy and value, not with, again, just leaving people grazing in the grass like animals, because they're simply not good at anything. They're not good at handling themselves. They need a community that is still run by the same people. So at the end of the day, that's why we have laws, why we have the police, why there must be a strict rule. And so you can't just pretend that any additional regulation is evil, because you're just the average moron who wants to just be an idiot and not having standards. Some regulation is bad, and that's why it crumbles. Some is good, and it works. Simple as that. That's what all history shows. So the purpose of seeking this true freedom is, of course, returning to God in a divine spirit. And again, that's all the beautifully wishful thinking that we have, while understanding, of course, the entirety of existence epitomized in the sublime expression of the same cross. And so a traditional world cannot exist without the law, also Catholic law, that is truth. Like, if you really care about elevating people's standards, it must be enforced in the same way. Doesn't matter if there are people who fall short of that, you will then cow them into obedience. But the ones who have wisdom will understand why that law must be followed, and they will thrive in that. And they will help others, in fact, not having, just behaving in the way that brings towards God. And with outside of the church, which is in this, you understand why it's the Catholic Church, because it's the ecumenic, the universal one. Nobody traditionally conceived something any different. Even the name of the Orthodox Church is Catholic. The official name is Catholic. There is a reason for that, regardless of the shortcomings, and that's why this law, of course, must be divine, and that's why also the Church maintains such high standards and challenge the empire to fixing sin and, moving forward, or better, ahead in civilization. And it must be ecumenic. It must be Catholic, because if it is not Catholic, everybody does whatever they want. And as we've seen, diversity immediately, metaphysically, mathematically, scientifically entails that there is somebody that is doing something wrong. There can't be so many confessions, and also just pretending that all of them are right or that it's good. There is an inherent sin in the fact that this multiplicity exists. There is an additional value even in the wall, right? And contrary to the general picture, there can be exceptions to the, say, there can be an autarkic force that can express the values of those who express them, who have them. But not just not being part of the Catholic oikumene is deleterious per se, and it's a major sin. But if these standards do not manage to meet with the ecumenic consensus, it means that they themselves are wrong. It may be that the rest of the people are not so good at it, but if these were really the true ones, they would succeed. Because it's your problem at the same time if also others fail. If your power is the true one, is the right one, why don't you dominate the world? This is the simple point also of the imperial Catholic tradition. And it's a collective sin. This is also true for the conventionally Catholic Church today. I mean, why isn't there a single Catholic Church? And, well, because of the shortcomings of the humans who make it up. But it's not like the principle can be denied. That's also why the Reformation is so dramatic and such a disaster, even just conceptually speaking, regardless, again, of the historical consequences that, in fact, are all but, comforting. And people are falling out of the law as falling out of a collective effort to make things work for everyone. And we all know also from military history how the collective effort is qualitatively superior than the sum of the individual ones, because it acts to virtue and discipline at the same time. Virtue alone would correspond to wisdom is not enough. You need the law, you need discipline. This is overwhelmingly important, morally, politically, strategically. The entire history of mankind shows us this, because it's a metaphysical principle. Law regulates, connects, confines active life, nor without the integrative knowledge that acts as a guiding norm for cultivating contemplative life. Right? So you need both. You need to exercise both within the confines of such communion that you have in law and knowledge. It's also is also shared, is also informing, again, the quality of people. Thus, the more one imposes constraints, the more the other facilitates liberation. In the balance ensues. Talking about law and wisdom. The law upholds the transient and ephemeral in a manner that transcends mere existence, creating a foundation for true liberation. Conversely, wisdom frees humanity from its confines, granting access to the kingdom of God and elevating individuals to the supramundane realm where they can be truly free among the liberated and triumph over death through the realization of eternal life. In other words, you cannot do without law and knowledge. We must follow both. There is never, in any traditional principle, a merely dualistic idea that overshadows the potential of corporative compenetration. There is a difference in merit and equality. They're not the same thing, but they're necessary, and they all fit the hierarchy, and they both compenetrate one another, because the law contains wisdom and vice versa. When you wield power, you know what are the rules, and when you understand the rules, you know how to wield power. This is so elementary. Humanly speaking, the problem is mostly the prevalence of contemplation. Admittedly, it's the fact that humanity essentially lost in sort of active effort. In part also because of the active sin, so that of course we needed more regulation. Again, in order to make things work, but things can work. It's like before the papacy in the empire splitting the original syncresis between temporal and spiritual power, but they work. They can make it up for the split, right? And that's actually what cements a further connection. So let's not abandon the path. Let's not give up on civilization, because it's the fruit of so much sacrifice and effort. And the entire history that regeneration should simply start from destroying everything doesn't make any sense. Because one thing is blind rage to destroy out of self-hatred and incapacity to actually self-actualize yourself. It seems to me that all the people who engage in this kind of rhetoric are just, people on Twitter, spending their entire life posting every 5 seconds without getting nowhere and being all anonymous, by the way, and at least in a true sense. And saying things that they would never say out there, or at least without incurring severe consequences. And that, in fact, self-sacrifice entails an immediate stepping further, immediate leap forward. That is not desolation, that is not the desert, that is not that point of arrival. If anything, these are the pathways, but not the points of destination. And power is always augmented, earthly, when divine law is fulfilled. Remember that. We have, as Westerners, an enormous trust in power. Let that never fade, because we're destined to rule the world. it has been so, and so it will. Right? In any case, I hope that this video was of some help, was of some use. We will talk again more a bit about the cross that legitimately here should have had the lion's share, but we didn't talk at least excessively about it. You understand how radically important these topics are, how foundational, how metaphysical they are, and how, in this sense, we can't do without them. For today, I stop it here. Again, I wish you a great Epiphany. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. As always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.